I'm going to get my hair cut short.
Are you? What do you people think? Should she get her hair cut short? Go on Twitter and post your opinions. Hi, welcome to Stories from Your Gaffer. I'm Clint McElroy. This is Carol McElroy, my wife. We are reading the Graveyard Book.
His concubine.
Are you my concubine? My consort. We are reading the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, art by Dave McKean. And we've got a long one, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, if you remember, he had just visited Nick in a dream and tried to scare him, and it worked because Nick started screaming.
Because Nick woke screaming.
Bod heard the scream, a shout of terror, and felt the satisfaction of a job well done. He was standing on the pavement outside Nick Farthing's house, his face damp from the thick night mist. He was exhilarated and exhausted. He had felt barely in control of the dream walk, had been all too aware that there was nothing else in the dream but Nick and himself, and that all Nick had been scared of was a noise. But Bob was satisfied. The other boy would hesitate before tormenting smaller kids. And now
Bob put his hands in his pockets and began to walk, not certain where he was going. He would leave the school, he thought, just as he had left the graveyard. He would go somewhere no one knew him, and he would sit in a library all day and read books and listen to people breathing. He wondered if there were still deserted islands in the world like the one on which Robinson Crusoe had been shipwrecked. He would go and live on one of those. Bob did not look up. If he had, he would have seen a pair of watery blue eyes watching him intently from the bedroom window.
he stepped into an alley, feeling more comfortable out of the light.
"Are you running away then?" said a girl's voice. Bod said nothing. "That's the difference between the living and the dead, isn't it?" said the voice. It was Liza Hempstock talking. Bod knew, although the witch girl was nowhere to be seen. "The dead's don't disappoint you. They've had their life, done what they've done. We don't change. The living, they always disappoint you, don't they? You meet a boy who's all brave and noble, and he grows up to run away."
"That's not fair," said Bod.
"The nobody Owens I knew wouldn't have run off from the graveyard without saying so much as fare thee well to those who cared for him. You'll break Mistress Owens' heart."
Bod had not thought of that. He said, "I had a fight with Silas.
"So?
He wants me to come back to the graveyard to stop school. He thinks it's too dangerous."
"Why? Between your talents and my bespellment, they'll barely notice you."
"I was getting involved. There were these kids bullying other kids. I wanted them to stop. I drew attention to myself."
Liza could now be seen, a misty shape in the alleyway, keeping pace with Bod. "He's out here somewhere. He wants you dead," she said. "Him as killed your family. Us in the graveyard, we want you to stay alive. We want you to surprise us and disappoint us and impress us and amaze us. Come home, Bod."
"I think I said things to Silas. He'll be angry."
"If he didn't care about you, you wouldn't upset him," was all she said. The autumn leaves were slick beneath Bod's feet, and the mist blurred the edges of the world. Nothing was as clean cut as he had thought a few minutes before.
"I did a dream walk," he
How
said.
did it go?
"Good," he said. "Well, all right."
"You should tell Mr. Pennyworth. He'll be pleased."
"You're right. I should." He reached the end of the alley, and instead of turning right as he had planned and off into the world, he turned left onto the high street, the road that would take him back to Dunstan Road and the graveyard on the hill.
"What?" said Liza Hempstock. "What you doing?"
"Going home," said Bod, "like you said."
There were shop lights now. Bod could smell the hot grease from the chip shop on the corner. The paving stones glistened. "That's good," said Liza Hempstock. Now only a voice once more. Then the voice said, "Run or fade. Something's wrong." Bod was about to tell her there was nothing wrong. She was being foolish when a large car with a flashing light on top came veering across the road and pulled up in front of him.
Two men got out from it. "Excuse me, young man," said one of the men. "Police. Might I ask what you're doing out so late?" "Well, I didn't know there was a law against it," said Bod. The largest of the policemen opened the rear door of the car. "Is this the young man you saw, miss?" he said.
Mo Quilling got out of the car and looked at Bod and smiled. "That's him," she said. "He was in our back garden breaking things, and then he ran away." She looked at Bod in the eyes. "I saw you from my bedroom," she said. "I think he's the one who's been breaking windows." "What's your name?" said the smaller policeman, had a ginger mustache.
Nobody, said Bod. Then ow, because the ginger policeman had taken Bod's ear between finger and thumb and had given it a hard squeeze.
Don't give me that, said the policeman. Now answer the question politely, right? Bod said nothing. Exactly where do you live? Asked the policeman.
Bod said nothing. He tried to fade, but fading, even when boosted by a witch, relies on people's attention sliding away from you, and everybody's attention, not to mention a large pair of official hands, was on him then. Bod said, "You can't arrest me for not telling you my name or address."
No, said the policeman, I can't, but I can take you down to the station till you give us the name of a parent, guardian, or responsible adult who care we can release you to. He put Bod in the back of the car where Mo Quilling sat with a smile on her face of a cat who had eaten all the canaries. I saw you from my front window, she said quietly, so I called the police.
I wasn't doing anything, said Bod. I wasn't even in your garden. And why are they bringing you out to find me? Quiet back there, said the large policeman. Everyone was quiet until the car pulled up in front of a house that had to be Mo's. The large policeman opened the door for her, and she got out. We'll call you tomorrow. Let your mom and dad know what we found, said the large policeman.
Thanks, Uncle Tam, said Mo, and she smiled, just doing my duty. They drove back through the town in silence, Bod trying to fade as best he could with no success. He felt sick and miserable. In one evening, he had his first real argument with Silas, had attempted to run away from home, but failed to run away, and now failed to return home. He could not tell the police where he lived or his name. He would spend the rest of his life in a police cell or a prison for kids. Do they have prisons for kids? He didn't know.
Excuse me, do they have prisons for kids? He asked the men in the front seat.
Getting worried, are you? Said Mo's Uncle Tam. I don't blame you. You kids, running wild. Some of you need locking up, I'll tell you. Bod wasn't sure if that was a yes or a no. He glanced out of the car window. Something huge was flying through the air above the car and to one side, something darker and bigger than the biggest bird, something man-sized that flickered and fluttered as it moved, like the strobing of a flight of a bat. The ginger policeman said, when we get to the station, best if you just give us your name and tell us who to call to come get you, and you can tell them we gave you a bollocking. They can take you home. See, you cooperate. You'll have an easy night. Less paperwork for everybody. We're your friends.
You're too easy on him. A night in the cells isn't that hard, said the large policeman to his friend. Then he looked back at Bod and said, unless it's a busy night and we have to put you in with some of the drunks. They can be nasty. And Bod thought, he's lying. And they're doing this on purpose. The friendly one and the tough one. And
then the police car turned a corner and there was a thump. Something big rode up onto the hood of the car and was knocked off in the dark. A screech of brakes, the car stopped. The ginger policeman began to swear under his breath. He just ran out into the road, he said. You saw it.
I'm not sure what I saw, said the larger policeman. You hit something, though.
They got out of the car and shone the lights around. The ginger policeman said, he was wearing black. You can't see it.
He's over there, shouted the large policeman. The two men hurried over to the body on the ground, holding flashlights.
Bod tried the door handles on the back seat. They did not work. There was a metal grill between the back and the front. Even if he faded, he was still stuck in the back seat of a police car. He leaned over as far as he could, craning to see what had happened, what was on the road. The ginger policeman was crouched beside a body looking at it. The other, the large one, was standing above it, shining a light into its face.
Bod looked at the face of the fallen body, and he began to bang on the window frantically, desperately. The large policeman came over to the car. What? He said irritably. You hit my dad, said Bod. You're kidding. It looks like him, said Bod. Can I look properly? The large policeman's shoulders slumped. Oi, Simon, the kid says it's his dad.
You gotta be bloody kidding me.
I think he's serious. The large policeman opened the door and Bod got out.
Silas was sprawled on his back on the ground where the car had knocked him. He was deathly still. Bod's eyes prickled.
He said, Dad? Then he said, you killed him. He wasn't lying, he told himself. Not really.
I've called an ambulance, said Simon, the ginger mustache policeman.
It was an accident, said the other. Bod crouched by Silas and he squeezed Silas's cold hand in his. If they had already called an ambulance, there was not much time. He said, so that's your career's over then.
It was an accident, you saw.
He just stepped out. What I saw, said Bod. is that you agreed to do a favor for your niece and frighten the kid she's been fighting with at school, so you arrested me without a warrant for being out late. And then when my dad runs out into the road to try and stop you or to find out what's going on, you intentionally ran him over.
It was an accident, repeated Simon.
You've been fighting with Mo at school, said Mo's Uncle Tam, but he didn't sound convincing. We're both in 8B at the Old Town School, said Bod, and you killed my dad.
Far off, he could hear the sound of sirens.
Simon, said the large man, we have to talk about this.
They walked over to the other side of the car, leaving Bod alone in the shadows. Leaving Bod alone in the shadows with the fallen Silas.
Well, come on, I'm just giving background noise.
Bod could hear the two policemen talking heatedly. Your bloody niece was used, and so was if you'd kept your eyes on the road. Simon jabbed his finger into Tam's chest.
Bod whispered, they aren't looking. Now? And he faded.
There was a whirl of deeper darkness, and the body on the ground was now standing beside him. Silas said, I'll take you home. Put your arms around my neck. Bod did, holding tightly to his guardian. They plunged through the night, heading for the graveyard.
I'm sorry, said Bod.
I'm sorry, too, said Silas.
Did it hurt? Asked Bod, letting the car hit you like that?
Yes, said Silas. You should thank your little witch friend. She came and found me and told me you were in trouble, and what kind of trouble you were in.
They landed in the graveyard. Bod looked at his home as if it was the first time he'd ever seen it. He said, what happened tonight was stupid, wasn't it? I mean, I put things at risk. More
things than you know, young nobody Owens. Yes.
You were right, said Bod. I won't go back, not to that school and not like that.
Maureen Quilling had the worst week of her life. Nick Farthing was no longer speaking to her. Her Uncle Tam had shouted to her about the Owens kid thing, then told her not to mention anything about that evening ever to anyone, as he could lose his job, and he wouldn't want to be in her shoes if that happened. Her parents were furious with her. She felt betrayed by the world. Only the year sevens weren't scared of her any longer. It was rotten. She wanted to see that Owens kid, who she blamed for everything that had happened to her so far, writhing in misery and agony. If he thought being arrested was bad, then she could concoct elaborate revenge schemes in her head, complex and vicious. They were the only thing that made her feel better, and they didn't even really help. If there was one job that gave Mo the creeps, it was cleaning up the science labs, putting away the Bunsen burners, making sure all the test tubes, petri dishes, unused filter papers, and the like were returned to their place. She only had to do it on strict rotation system once every 2 months, but it stood to reason that here, in the worst week of her life, she would be in the science lab.
At least Mrs. Hawkins, who taught general sciences, was there collecting papers, gathering things up at the end of the day. Having her there, having anybody there, was comforting. You're doing a good job, Maureen, said Mrs. Hawkins.
A white snake and a jar of preservative stared blindly down at them. Mo said, thanks.
Aren't there meant to be two of you? Asked Mrs. Hawkins.
I was supposed to be doing it with the Owens kid, said Mo, but he hasn't been to school in days now.
The teacher frowned. Which one was he? She asked absently. I don't have him down on my list.
Bob Owens, brownish hair, a bit too long, didn't talk much. He was the one who named all the bones of the skeleton in the quiz, remember?
Not really, admitted Mrs. Hawkins.
You must remember. Nobody remembers him, not even Mr. Kirby.
Mrs. Hawkins pushed the rest of the sheets of paper into her bag and said, well, I appreciate you doing it out on your own, dear. Don't forget to wipe down the working surfaces before you go. And she went, closing the door behind her.
The science labs were old. There were long, dark wooden tables with gas jets and taps and sinks built into them. And there were dark wooden shelves upon which displayed a selection of things in large bottles. The things that floated in the bottles were dead, had been dead for a long time. There was even a yellowed human skeleton in one corner of the room. Mo did not know if it was real or not, but right now it was creeping her out.
Every noise she made echoed in that long room. She turned all the overhead lights on, even the light on the whiteboard, just to make the place less scary. The room began to feel cold. She wished she could turn up the heat. She walked over to one of the large metal radiators and touched it. It was burning hot, but still she was shivering. The room was empty and unsettling in its emptiness, and Mo felt as if she were not alone, as if she were being watched.
Well, of course I'm being watched, she thought. 100 dead things in jars are all looking at me, not to mention the skeleton. She glanced up at the shelves. That was when the dead things in the jars began to move. The snake with an unseeing milky eyes uncoiled in its alcohol-filled jar. A faceless, spiny sea creature, twisted and revolved in its liquid home. A dead kitten, dead for decades, showed its teeth and clawed at the glass. Mo closed her eyes. This isn't happening, she told herself. I'm imagining it. I'm not frightened, she said aloud.
That's good, said somebody standing in the shadows by the rear door. It seriously sucks to be frightened.
She said, none of the teachers even remember you.
But you remember me, said the boy, the architect of all her misfortunes. She picked up a glass beaker and threw it at him. But her aim went wide and it smashed against a wall.
Come on, let's go. Come on. Come on, this way.
How's Nick? Asked Vaude, as if nothing had happened. You know how he is, she said. He won't even talk to me, just shuts up in class, goes home and does his homework, probably building model railways. Good, he said.
And you, she said, you haven't been at school for a week. You're in such trouble, Bob Owens. The police came in the other day. They were looking for you.
That reminds me. How's your Uncle Tam? Said Vaude.
Mo said nothing.
In some ways, said Vaude, you've won. I'm leaving school. And in other ways, you haven't. Have you ever been haunted, Maureen Quilling? Ever looked in the mirror wondering if the eyes looking back at you were yours? Ever sat in an empty room and realized you were not alone? It's not pleasant.
You're going to haunt me? Her voice trembled. Bod said nothing at all. He just stared at her. In the far corner of the room, something crashed. Her bag, had slipped off the chair onto the floor. And when she looked back, she was alone in the room. Or at least there was nobody that she could see there with her. Her way home was going to be very long and very dark.
The boy and his guardian stood at the top of the hill, looking out at the lights of the town. Does it still hurt? Asked the boy.
A little, said his guardian, but I heal fast. I'll soon be as good as ever.
Could it have killed you, stepping out in front of that car?
His guardian shook his head. There are ways to kill people like me, he said, but they don't involve cars. I'm very old, very tough.
Bod said, I was wrong, wasn't I? The whole idea was to do it without anybody noticing. And then I had to get involved with the kids in the school. And the next thing you know, there's police and all sorts of stuff because I was selfish.
Silas raised an eyebrow. I can't do just one, sorry. You weren't selfish. Yeah, that's it. You weren't selfish. You needed to be among your own kind. Quite understandable. It's just harder out there in the world of the living, and we cannot protect you out there as easily. I wanted to keep you perfectly safe, said Silas. But there's only one perfectly safe for your kind, perfectly safe place for your kind, and you will not reach it until all your adventures are over and none of them matter any longer.
Bod rubbed his hand over the stone of Thomas R. Stout, 1817 to 1851, deeply regretted by all who knew him, feeling the moss crumble beneath his fingers. He's still out there, said Bod, the man who killed my first family. I still need to learn about people. Are you going to make me stop leaving the graveyard?
No, that was a mistake and one we have both learned from.
And what?
We should do our best to satisfy your interest in stories and books and the world. There are libraries, there are other ways, and there are many situations in which there might be other living people around you, like theater or cinema.
What's that? Is it like football? I enjoyed watching them play football at school.
Football? It's usually a little early in the day for me, said Silas, but Miss Lepescu could take you to see a football match the next time she's here. Match. Next time she's here.
I'd like that, said Bod.
They began to walk down the hill. Silas said, You have both left too many tracks and traces in the last few weeks. They're still looking for you, you know.
You said that before, said Bud. How do you know? And who are they? What do they want?
Silas only shook his head and would be drawn no further. And with that, for the time being, Bod had to be satisfied.
The next chapter, chapter 7, the title of it is The Man Jack.
I like the Man Jack.
So real quick, picture from Beauty and the Beast. I played Maurice. Getting a peck on the cheek from Belle. So.
Real quick, picture.
Oh.
Short hair. Ooh. Yes.
Hold it still.
Yes or no? That's an old short haircut.
So go on Twitter. Cast your vote, yes or no.
I mean, look at it. It's blank.
We'll see you tomorrow evening at 5:30. And until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and choose joy.